Welcome to our second and the last day of the 2024 Effordability Summit. It's been wonderful to see so many of you here again today. So we'd like to welcome you back today and also welcome those of you who were not here yesterday and are attending today. First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Affordability Planning Committee. I know you heard a little bit about them yesterday, and also I think on one of our slides we've been showing the people that are on that committee. So I'm first of all going to thank Bob Butterfield, who is Instructional Resources Service. You kind of own this. Amber Olson, Instructional Resources Service. Amber makes a lot of magic happen. Lane Pitt, Instructional Resources Service. Also, great contributor. Rachel Mahoney, Instructional Resources Services. Corey Whipke, University Library. Corey, are you here? Corey Mitchell, University Library. Hannah Schillinger, Continuing Education and Conferences. Scott Revore, Continuing Education and Conferences. Katie Larson, University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Christopher Larson, University of Minnesota. Dr. Bobby Fields, Moraine Park Technical College. Michael Olson, Minnesota State. Dr. Rebecca Gretz, University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. Dr. Dan Olaso, Bemidji State University. And Nakia Stampley, Graduate Research Assistant, Department of English, Philosophy, and Communication Studies. So thank you all for serving on the committee and for all of the hard work that you did to make this event possible this year. And now I would like to ask Eve Folstead, who is a student manager for textbooks, if she would come up, introduce herself, and speak to the work that she and her students have done and the contributions that they have made to help ensure the success of this year's summit. Eve?
Thank you so much. So as she said, I am the student manager for textbook services here at Stout, and I help the student customer representatives handle conflicts and get projects done throughout the school year. So I would like to thank Abdullah El-Jeffrey, Natalie Tevet, Eric Gritzmacher, Logan Menenga, Mardula Dublaka, Chow Win. These are the students that help get everything done behind the scenes, make sure that all the nitty-gritty things actually get done, and make sure that students get their textbooks every semester. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eve. I want to say that I have really enjoyed being a member of the planning committee. I've been on the committee for a few years now, and it's just amazing to be working with this team of people. With that being said, I would encourage all of you that would like to help plan next year's summit to reach out to one of us that are on the committee, or to look on your tables, and on each of your tables you'll see that there's a paper with a QR code on it. Before you leave the summit today, would you please go in and do a feedback survey for us? That information is extremely valuable to us when we're planning the next year's summit. And I know there's a few of you that have made some suggestions to us for improvements. And then we've had a lot of compliments as well. So if you're interested in serving on the planning committee, please make sure you indicate that on the form that you fill out, or connect with one of us. Your feedback will really be critical in helping us to plan our 2025 Affordability Summit, which will take place here on April 8th and 9th of 2025. So then I'm just going to cover a few quick housekeeping items. There's coffee and breakfast items in the back of the room. Please feel free to get refreshments before and during our keynote. We will also have an afternoon break this afternoon at 1:45. You will find bathrooms around the corner on each side of the Great Hall, as well as across from the cafeteria and downstairs. And then we're just going to do a brief overview of today's schedule of events. Today we're going to start the day with our keynote speaker, Irina, Otto, who will speak on the power of artificial intelligence. Following our keynote, we'll take a short break and then welcome you to attend a variety of presentations from 10:30 to 11:45. We then will take a break from lunch from 11:45 to 1 p.m. A buffet-style lunch will be served here in the Great Hall. If you would like to get food items that are not offered on the buffet, there's also a cafeteria down the hall here on the second floor of the Student Center, and also a small convenience store with snacks and other food items downstairs. I'd like to thank all of you once again for attending the summit. It has been a privilege to be able to help with the planning of this event. Minnesota State truly values the opportunity to partner with UW-Stout in planning and hosting the summit, and we hope to continue this partnership for many more years. And now I'd like to turn this over to Stephen Kelly, who will introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Karen, for the introduction. My name is Stephen Kelly. I currently serve as a project manager on what's called the Next Gen Student Implementation Team at the Minnesota State System Office. And it's my pleasure this morning to introduce our speaker, Irina Otto. But before I do that, I want to recollect a story that happened just yesterday that I think is particularly fitting for the circumstances this morning. Last week, when Karen called me up and invited me to introduce Irina today, I thought, oh, this is great. What a perfect opportunity. I'm really interested in artificial intelligence, and the speaker is going to be talking on artificial intelligence, and I would love to do this. And after I said yes, it quickly occurred to me that, wait, if I'm going to do this, I'm either going to need one of two things. I either need an awful lot of facts that are ready to go that I can write something up with, or I really need to connect with Irina and learn more about her. And as I thought more about it, I decided, I'm not sure I want to look up facts on the internet and just try to write something about someone. I really think I need to connect with the person to make sure that I understand the kinds of things that are important to their professional and personal history, and that those are communicated effectively. And so I reached out to Irina and I said, hey, can we connect at some point in time and have a conversation about your background so that I can provide you the best introduction at the Affordability Summit possible? And Irina got back to me and said, absolutely, let's do that. So we set up a meeting yesterday at 10 o'clock a.m. and got together on Microsoft Teams. And coming into that meeting, I was at least a little prepared. I had written up several questions that I wanted to ask Irina, questions that I thought would feed into an introduction for a speaker very well. And we got on the Teams call, and I said, well, we can do this one of two ways, Irina. I said, I am perfectly happy to take some notes. I've got some questions I'd like to ask you, and we can just have a nice conversation. I'll do my best to keep up. Or, this is your instance of Microsoft Teams. You can enable Microsoft Copilot, and we can let Copilot do some work for us and just have our conversation. What would you like to do? Well, of course, Irina said, let's do Copilot. That makes sense, right? Because Irina, I'm sure, is going to talk about Copilot a bit with us today. And so we did that, and we had a wonderful conversation for 30 minutes time. And afterwards, Irina sent me, and by afterwards, I mean 3 minutes later, she sent me a complete introduction for her today, based on the 30-minute conversation we had in Microsoft Teams, recorded with Copilot, and almost ready for presentation. And I say almost ready for presentation because as I read through the feed from Copilot, there were some items that I wasn't too happy with as a presenter myself. I thought some adjectives weren't quite colorful enough or rich enough in character. I thought there were some other ways that things were worded that could be done better. And frankly, if I'm going to give the introduction, I want a little bit of my own style in there too, right? So I got to Copilot. I did some nice editing on it. That's some human in the loop. And I shared it back with Irina. I said, what do you think of this? And she said, this looks wonderful. Let's roll with it. And so today, the introduction I'm going to share with you all is just that. An introduction from a 30-minute authentic conversation between myself and Irina Otto, processed by Microsoft Copilot, infused with some of the color of Stephen Kelly, and now presented to you here today. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Irina Otto. Irina is the Chief Technology Officer of Artificial Intelligence and Private Capital at Microsoft, where she works with top-tier private equity and venture capital firms to help them transform their portfolios with AI and cloud technologies. Always curious and eager to learn new things, she has a deep professional and research background in data science, cloud computing, and generative artificial intelligence. Irina has a bachelor's degree in computer science with a minor in artificial intelligence from the University of California, Irvine. She possesses a master's degree in data science from Johns Hopkins University and is currently pursuing an executive MBA at the prestigious University of Chicago Booth School of Business. She is a board member of the J.K. Lee City Youth Martial Arts Program in Milwaukee, which promotes discipline and leadership among local youth. She is also pursuing a black belt in Taekwondo alongside her son. Irina is passionate about using AI to make a positive impact on society, especially in the areas of education and healthcare. She believes that AI will be a transformational force that will require us to rethink how we learn, work, and coexist with intelligent agents. She is here to share with us her insights and vision on how AI can shape the future of education and what we need to prepare for it. Please join me in welcoming Irina Otto.
Well, thank you so much for introduction. I hope you guys hear me really well. I'm super excited to be here and be a keynote speaker. Again, AI becoming a part of our world faster. And yeah, I want to just share, if you see my background right now, this is actually something that we've done with my son. He likes to write little storybooks. And he always wants to see what kind of art we can create together. So we actually use Midjourney to create art that you see behind me that called Blue Moon and a Cow. If you're familiar with the style, if you're familiar with the art, we use a base as a Starry Night from the Van Gogh to create this type of funky representation of what he wants to tell about in his story and how he wants to do that. So this is one of the examples where we already start to see that this type of AI start to proficiently relate, to our kids, to our schools, in our education. And so it's really important to talk about it and start to think about how this particular technology will transform our world. So if we think about AI and why generative AI technology, we need to start today, and we don't really have a tons of time to rethink, spend time to kind of change our world. We really need to start to think today and implement a lot of solutions today to ensure that AI that we're using today is for the greater good and not used for the bad things. So this is, for example, an example of how fast ChatGPT got to the point that 100 million people start to use it. So if you look at that, it took about 16 years for mobile phones to achieve 100 million users. It took internet, which was in 2000, about 7 years when it achieved 100 million. Facebook was 4.5, introduction of the social media in 2010s, and now we're talking about ChatGPT that was introduced to the public in 2022. Within 3 months, it achieved 100 million users. And so today, it's one of the most used application and most talked application around the world. So as we start to look and start to do, a lot of companies start to engage in the research to understand how the future of work will change with generative AI. And this is one of the example of research that coming from McKinsey. What we see is, and we'll share the slide, is that for the first time, the most effect and most impact from introduction of technology will be felt in white-collar jobs. So a lot of this conversation, we're talking about automation, ability to co-pilot a work or totally take it from the people and transfer it to the AI systems. It's actually the white-collar job. So the people that coming from the colleges, people who right now having high-paid jobs. So it's very critical to understand how this type of jobs will transform in the next few years and how people can take advantage of this and make sure that we continue to build a future workforce in a way that they can be employable and find the right positions. So another important thing that we're looking at is what type of skills people will need and how we think about it. Surprisingly, when we're talking about introduction of AI in the world, it's not necessarily actually technical skills. We will need and will continue to need people that have a strong STEM backgrounds. We need people who are able to understand how to build algorithms, how to scale engineering systems, how to build a new semiconductors to able to process this information faster and cheaper. But in the same time, if you're looking at broader population, we also see that the most important skills that we'll need around workforce is social and emotional skills. We also need to understand that majority of the people that will interact with the next systems will need a very well developed critical thinking. Sometimes it's one of the misunderstood statement, but in a lot of cases, and we'll talk about this later today, critical thinking and ability to interact in a way, interact with AI in a productive way will require people to rethink their way of thinking, their biases, and understand the limitation of current systems. So sometimes I have to start this conversation with statement, which is really important. What is AI? Artificial intelligence has many definitions. There is a lot of conversation right now, especially when we start to talk about the race to achieve general intelligence. This is one that I really like because it's really says something here that really important to understand. AI is the simulation of human intelligence and machine that are programmed to think and learn like humans. So when we think a lot of time when I'm talking to people, they very impressed how current LLMs, large language models, able to interact, and it's a very good imitation of thinking. But as we show later, there is a big difference between actually simulation versus actual the way we think. Another important thing to understand that AI involves the creation of algorithms and computer programs to perform tasks that typically require human intelligent decision-making. So when we start to think about AI systems, we really need to understand that there is a limitation that system has, and as we're learning and building more advanced system, understanding how the system is developed, what's the background of the system is very critical to ensure that we have a positive interaction with the systems. So just a little bit history around artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence was not born in 2020 when ChatGPT came out. Artificial intelligence is actually a pretty mature field, and some of the first development that we see happening in the 1950s around symbolic logic. We started to build what's now known as expert systems. And a lot of this work comes from the World War II, an ability to create expert system by Alex Turing. Next, what we see is the big shift happening in 1970s, 1980s, where we're moving from shifting from the symbolic AI to more sub-symbolic and building a system that based on statistical method and mathematical models to solve the problem. The reason we also learn, like all humans learn, is that the way we think is not necessarily based on our knowledge base. A lot of times we infer information, we determine with high or low probability or confidence, depending on you and your level of confidence, information that we might not be familiar. So a lot of this development happening in 1970s, 1980s, where we start to see first mainframe show up and ability to people to put a lot of information into the computers and start to do processing. The next big jump happened in 90s and 2000, and this was correlated with the boom of the internet and ability to access the large set of information, a lot of set of data that allowed people to actually start to build much more sophisticated models. And this is the first term, like neural networks start to show up. And if you're familiar with the neural networks, it's based how our brain works. So our brain has a lot of neurons connecting to each other. The more often you activate the neurons or combination of the neurons, that connection between two neurons become thicker and thicker and thicker, and therefore we're more and more using this particular path. So very similar, neural networks has a very similar approach, but they're using statistical models and methods to create this type of connection between different set of informations. So the access to information was there. I think what we didn't have in that time is the power and cheaper capabilities around running and learning systems. So 2017, this is right after post-cloud revolution that happens, where majority of cloud allowed a lot of companies and researchers to have access to much cheaper power, memory, and storage. And now we see the birth of deep learning and flourishing of the deep learning capabilities, which focusing on supervised, unsupervised, and reinforced learning. And this is kind of one of the beginning of developing of the deep learning systems. And so the last step, I think, and it's probably not the last step in the future, is generative AI. So generative AI is, you heard in my introduction, is also not a new field. So generative AI, if you think about this, it's a combination and it's sub studies of the artificial intelligence. And in a lot of this, it's a combination of multiple techniques, multiple algorithms that allowed us to do the work. The generative AI qualify in two major categories. You have generative models and discriminative models. Generative models, such as GPT, DALL-E, variational autoencoders, they learn underlying the basic work of this, they learn underlying distribution of the data set, and then generate some sort of output with certain level of confidence. One of my fun projects when I was in Johns Hopkins, when we started to develop this type of solutions, was actually learning about cats and watermelons, and then I was asked, create an image with the cat that has watermelon stripes. So that was kind of the beginning, a lot of these ideas where you start to put multiple data sets and try to generate something that is look like something that potentially the system have not seen. Discriminative models, this is the deep neural networks primarily, they actually more differentiate between different classes or categories, and then generally used for tasks like image creation and speech recognition. So the cats, for example, I create was both using discriminative models techniques as well as autoencoders to help this type of definition. So this is just give you some understanding that generative AI was here for a while, and the reason why it's become such a powerful tools is the breakthrough that OpenAI made around developing general transformers, which is what the GPT stands for. And this create ability to produce information or create information in a much faster way, much more optimized way, and ability to process the amount of information that's having a supercomputers that actually can process this type of information to train the system is fascinating. And this is where we see in the last 2021 where generative AI was born. Now, really important things to think about is this is a very fast evolving field, and there is a lot of unknown. So when I have a conversation with people, it's going from we go to utopia, everything will be wonderful, and AI will solve our all difficult problems, to dystopia where people believe that it's going to kill us in the next few years. So I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think as any powerful technology, it has potential to be beneficial to the society, but it also can be super harmful. And we need to be aware of this and deal with and counteract with this in any field or industries. So as I said, the AI have been here for a while. If you have at home, most of you probably have Alexas. We all use the autopilot in our system. So AI have been around for a long time. And I think we will see more proliferation of this, specifically around productivity, automation, task, decision-making, in providing the just-in-time improvements related to the services, manufacturing, finance, and healthcare. Just to give you some understanding how big this model is, because sometimes people don't think, well, what's big mean, right? Why it's better than the humans? Why it's work better as a human? So I think this is one of the research project that Microsoft has, Infinity, and it was developed probably in 2021, where we went from description of what you want to see, and the system generate the text to image coming from the combination of the image that is created. But also today we can easily generate from these images, we actually can create the videos. This has a huge impact. If you heard in a recent announcement, I think 3 or 4 months ago, Sora was announced as a generally available models that allowed you to generate images. So I think, as you can see, the potential of this model is enormous. But also I want to kind of give you some explanation of how fast these models grow, right? So the first model that we consider in the family of the LLMs is BERT, that was developed in 2018. It has 340 million parameters that was created. By 2020, Turing and LG, which is the model that I just showed you, has about 17 billion parameters. GPT-3 in the same year created a model that have 175 billion parameters. And literally a year later, we have models that have 530 billion parameters, and it's keep growing. So it's mean that these models will become more powerful, they become more intelligent, and help us a lot of, will integrate it in work in a lot of areas of our life. This, I think, is very relevant to education, and we usually want to show this to reflect on how, as a humans, and what the humans we need to learn, and how we can be more powerful in the world of AI. Just to understand from testing perspective, today, GPT 3.5, which is, I think, now a 2-year-old model, cannot perform the majority of the tests. They can take the test, they can pass the test better than majority of the humans. As we're coming to the more advanced model, they will become better and better in every test, which shows us that, the humans will never able to compete with this, just because access to information that this system has and ability to produce fact based on the questions, it's going to be much more aligned with how AI work versus how the humans work. So idea of testing humans to get the degree, it will be interesting to see how that particular change and how we need to think about what we're really testing when it's come to the humans. The second part that I want to kind of talk about, which is very important, is the reflection around autonomous system versus copilot system. So autonomous systems been in developing for a while. I think if you're familiar with the Tesla and Elon Musk, when the Tesla was announced, Elon Musk was very optimistic about developing autonomous system that will able to drive a car autonomously. I personally own the Tesla, so I'm very familiar with how the system works. I will still not drive Tesla on autonomously on the Wisconsin roads, just to be very clear, especially in the winter. This is the idea that is very terrifying, especially when I have a kid in the car. And I'm familiar with the system. So I think the challenge is that, surprisingly, it's not just about the AI that was built, because it's super sophisticated. What these models can build and how they built in Tesla and others autonomous system for driving, it's extremely sophisticated and will perform better as a human. The challenge is when this system interact with another human driver on opposite road. And majority of the time, the car will make most logical choice. The human on another side might not. And this is, in a lot of cases, the error actually happening on the human side versus in the machine, but we're both gonna crash, right? So idea of having homogeneous systems where you have autonomous vehicles and non-autonomous vehicles, actually quite complex problem. And today it's probably not as close to solving as some optimists think about that. But again, this is why, if you're familiar and watch YouTube videos around how the autonomous vehicle in San Francisco, how fun it was for some of the fire departments to drive through them, especially in the logs. That shows you how complex the systems are. They're capable, they just don't understand humans good enough to do this type of work. So Microsoft actually taking a different approach and we take a different position. We do not believe that AI will replace humans in any format or shape in the next years in the next feasible. I think in my lifetime, we're not going to see that. But what we'll see is a strong partnership between AI and humans, co-pilot type of work, because I think we still will have to question and be able to leverage our strengths and AI strengths to provide a better result. So one of the examples when talking about healthcare is we already today have systems that, specifically in radiology, that can produce better results than radiologists in detecting certain type of cancers and be able to provide a better results. That being said, combining the system with the professional get even better results. So I think another important thing to understand is when this system, when we're talking about mission critical, life critical systems, there is very often expectation that we want AI to be 100% right. So if we want to talk about healthcare again, detecting cancer, if you have 99% accuracy achieved, is it good or bad? Sometimes I'm talking to the people say, no, we want 100%. But if I talk to what's the average rate of errors in a doctor or human population, it's going to be much lower than 99%. So we have a very sometimes unrealistic expectation from the systems. But when we saying that, for example, the system might have less false negative, which is basically means that it can be life and death situation, right? If you tell me that I don't have cancer, but I do, that mistake can cost me life. So I think importance of understanding how to design system that creating coexistence of the AI agents and humans together has become super important. And this is primarily the focus where Microsoft comes, where we're talking about automation, productivity, around the tasks that we don't want to do or we find mundane, because when we find the task mundane, this is when we make the most mistakes. How do we automate this? How we introduce automation where we do not want to do the work, but it's really good for AI, and then focus our capabilities more where the work is more interesting on the research, creation, and developing of new systems. So this is how, when you're talking about Microsoft Copilots, it's really important to understand when you're talking about Copilots, today Microsoft infusing Copilot in every sides of their business. So from the sales to software developers to security to customer service. I think as Stefan was introducing me, he talks about how teams become the team co-pilots become super important to us. Today, majority of my time when I spend on the meetings, I do not take notes. And it's actually, as we probably know, multitasking is not great for humans. So when you're taking the notes, you might not listening. So today, I think I become a better listener just because I can not take the notes because the system will take the notes. I have transcribe if I don't, if I feel like something was missing on these notes, and go to transcription and ask questions about transcribing and see if the information that I'm looking was actually discussed, or did we miss it during the transcribing. But I can focus on listening people, try to understand the question, try to be present in conversation, making sure that we have a better connection as a humans because we do work better when we listen. I think it's also important, like in software development side, we see a lot of work from development perspective that can be taken away to ensure that the developers focusing on the most important things. So, for example, majority of the work that I do with the companies, they have a tons of legacy code that was written many years ago, and people who wrote them already gone a long time ago. If you ask any developer, including me, I started my career as a developer, this is the worst job you can have, where you're going through somebody else's code and thinking, oh my gosh, why they didn't fire this guy before? Why it's so bad and why it's so horrible? And then you write the same exact code, and probably in 10, 15 years, somebody looking in my code saying, like, why this person wrote this code is so horrible, right? But this is the important thing of a lot of companies today, going through the legacy code, understanding what's written, optimizing this code without breaking existing system, which is very challenging. So a lot of code today in the GitHub Copilot allows you to do just that. It can go through the code, it can interrogate the code, it can explain you what this code is doing, and then maybe propose a better approach to the code, or also potentially create a documentation for the code as well as test the code. So this is becoming areas where people might not interested working in, and helping them to do this much faster and move on to much more interesting job, which is creating a new solution, be able to generate new opportunities for the business, and focusing on that rather than try to figure out the code that was written 10, 15 years ago. So, and we can talk about this in many other ways. One important thing to understand, again, when you're talking about specifically around Microsoft, Microsoft offer a really big set of solutions. And what we understand is not everybody going to be data science, not everybody understand data engineering, but there is a lot of business people today that do understand the business. They do understand and have ideas how to do this work. So Microsoft is really focusing to enable everybody to take advantage of the AI. So we have solutions that is low code, no code type of environments that allowed people, to business users, to create AI capabilities in their system using the natural language, basically asking the system to create certain capabilities, and then enable the system really fast and develop into the production. We also working with a lot of developers, and important part around that is that, again, generative AI is not panacea. Generative AI has a lot of issues, and we'll talk about this later. So applying the right set of tools to solve the right type of problems is super critical. And one of the things that I do a lot with the companies is really thinking through how to do optimization of the system. So, for example, we have a customized AI model, the specialized AI models for a long time. Translators language translators are super good. So today, Microsoft Translator can probably accurately translate up to 100+ languages, and it does really fast in real time, fantastically. I'm traveling, my translators I have on my phone. When I'm traveling in the countries that I don't speak the language, I usually use that translator to communicate with the people, and it's doing really good on that side. We also provide a lot of solutions that are specialized on specific type of task, like form recognizers, because form recognizers, if you're talking about certain type of documentation processing, you don't need a generative AI. You don't, in most of the cases, want generative AI to generate something. You actually want to understand and have a confidence in documentation that is processed and not come up with some new ideas. So this type of services are available, and they allow people to create the solution really fast and process any type of documentation in real time, really fast, and then potentially leveraging generative AI to do more sophisticated work. So this is, for example, an example what you can develop really fast, what is called Power Apps, where you just provide Copilot and say, create a building safety inspection app. As you can see here, it will generate fully app for you with all the information, everything that you will need. And at this point, as a user, you can adjust, modify, whatever you need to do, add additional information you need to do. But this is today is possible just by telling the system what you want to build. The more information you provide, the better. But in this case, this type of generation will happen within 5 minutes. So think about this and the power of this introducing to the people that potentially might be not engineers and might be not developers, but actually ability to just generate that and potentially go to developers and say, this is what I want. Now make it pretty and make it more sophisticated. But idea of that, putting this type of tool in hands of users, business users, has become super powerful and allowed to accelerate development in majority of the company really fast. So it's all great, and it's fantastic. And I think, as I said, it's going to be a great opportunity for us to collaborate and create tools and capabilities that will create a huge benefits for our society. That being said, we also have to face and understand that right now, today, AI is a very powerful tool and has a lot of challenges and ethical consideration that needs to be discussed and addressed and make people aware to ensure that the AI use responsible and people actually recognize or aware what the information is generated by AI, how this information used by the users, and whether or not it's a right and appropriate to use this. It's also important to understand that humans and people are responsible for ability to the system to not create a digital divide across the society, making the system accessible to everybody, and of course, accountability and transparency, where does this data come from, how this decision was made, is super important, and it's really important to understand how to develop the system. Another thing that we really concern around today is bias and fairness in AI algorithms. So in a lot of cases, again, this is where we're talking about imitation of the thinking versus actually true thinking, because a lot of this information is provided, and it's provided in a very specific context for the system to learn. So if the information is biased, the AI will amplify the biases, right? So I think the most classical examples that we have is around lending. The data that sometimes we have around lending money for mortgages come from 1950s, 1960s, where women did not have access to the mortgages. The underrepresented minorities was discriminated against when this loans was issued. So when we're building this data and information, building the systems on that type of data, you have to be very careful on how the system provides recommendation and do some sort of work to ensure that the system does not amplify these biases. It's not as simple as it might seem, because when we talk to some people, say, well, just remove this data, don't use female or male, do not use this data and this data to make the system learn. It's not that simple, because, as I said, this system takes billions and billions of set of data. When we start to remove the data sets or remove certain information out of the data sets, it actually can skew information, and it actually can create even more biased systems. And this is where it's become really important to understand and do a lot of research in regulatory and compliance of the system, and focusing on transparency of how these weights affect the decision rather than removing the data out. Another important thing to understand, a lot of times these algorithms developed by engineers, the people that might not understand implication of the data set that has been provided, or do not have a social or economical training to understand how this particular information is biases one way or another. So from a technical standpoint of view, it doesn't make sense. It's also, so it's mean that technical company cannot make decision which data should or should not go inside of the system. And this is a responsibility of the companies that train the system and learn from the system and use the system. Another important thing to understand is when, in some cases, this data might be creating a negative biases, in another system, these biases might be extremely important. So for example, in a healthcare system, your heritage, your gender might have a critical role in determining whether or not you're going to have certain disease or do have a predisposition to certain disease. And so removing that data from that system will be actually wrong in the first place. And that discrimination needs to happen in that system to ensure that we provide much more accurate diagnosis and better treatments for the specific groups of patients. So when we're talking about the system AIs, when they're biased, we need to understand that the AI systems are based on a human way of interaction with the world. AI is biased because we are biased. Our way we work, it's our human nature, right? This is why we survive for so long, because bias help us to shortcut a lot of decisions. Now, as we're living in much more complex societies, these biases can be actually bad for us, society, but this is one of our biological response to ensure that we can make decision much faster and make decision more efficiently, which it doesn't mean necessarily that it's the right decision. So one way to improve the system is really start to teach people to use critical thinking and be able to produce this information. I think one of the great examples, when we did some fun exercises with students, because of course, we're all aware of the biases, therefore we're not biases, right? So we don't have any biases, but that's not true. So one of the examples where it's very permanent is when we start to ask people some questions and ask them to think about the outcome. So I will ask you this question, and you don't need to answer this, but think in your head what you're thinking about it. So I say, why did Justice Ruth Ginsburg dissent on a Obergefell case? Just think about this for a minute. So some of you might know that case, some of you not, and you might have no response to this particular question. If I provide a little bit more information and say that this is the case was around same-sex marriage, some of you might start to question if the question is actually right? Because based on your knowledge and know how Justice Ginsburg vote in general, it kind of seems weird that I will say that she dissent on that particular case. This is our way of critical thinking. But if you put this question into some of the models today, it will give you a reasoning why she dissent, which is actually not true. She did not dissent, she voted for that case. And this is the example of the counterfactual biases. This is very common bias that leveraging by the fake generation of the fake information and misinformation, because what's happening in a lot of cases, we actually tend to not question the question. We're not asking if the question is correct. We kind of either looking for the response to this question or try to assume that the question is factually true, which is a lot of cases where misinformation coming from. Because if you ask people a specific question and then provide information in that context, you can provide and generate a lot of information that is misinformation in general. similar confirmation bias is very common for us to, in general, to look for information that confirm our biases. So if I believe in something, I want to confirm that. So you can ask question give me 10 reasons why am I this particular decision is wrong or right, which tells you that the question itself is wrong, because what you're trying to do, instead of trying to think critically about the question, you're really thinking about how to confirm the belief that you have. And this is these two particular biases is very common and very hard to detect. And if you construct the right questions in the right format and then generate information, the propagation of misinformation happening really fast. So some of the examples actually I want to talk about is really when you start to think about how to interact with the AI system. So prompt engineering, you probably heard about this. This is the way to start to think about how you actually create the question in such a way the system can help you to respond in the way they're looking. So we just talked about confirmation bias. This more about accuracy. So generative systems, as I said, are not accurate systems. They're not meant to produce accurate information. They infer information based on the data that they have. The good news that system can learn from the algorithm, but it also can learn from the question. So one of the things, for example, when we're talking about zero shot question, which is zero shot, it means that I just ask a question. So if you see the first prompt here, if I ask first question and second question, GPT 3.5, for example, will give you the wrong answer for the second problem. So if you ask, the cafeteria has 23 apples. If they use 20 to make lunch and bought 6 more, how many do they have? If you do math and calculation, you're probably going to be really fast on that. Computer get it wrong. Why? Because this is a multi-step problem, and this required a lot of understanding the sequencing of the events before answering the question. So in this context, it's kind of used the lazy thinking and did not do proper inference. If you add the second prompt instead, and you give the example of how the problem that you want to solve, how this problem solve, it will give you the right answer, especially if you prompt ask the system to provide the reasoning. It's very important techniques to ask for reasoning before you actually ask the question. Because if you do play with the system and you ask the question and it give you the right answer, and they after this you provide the reasons for why it's right, it will justify it. So there is a difference between reasoning and justification, right? So if you really want to answer correctly, you need to ask the system to provide reason and steps on how that's making system make the decision. So this is where, as you start to use the system in a more sophisticated way, you need to understand the chain of thoughts. It's possible, and it's quite sophisticated in the systems. However, you really need to ask the system to provide step-by-step instructions on how they calculate. So I think it's very similar when I was taking the exams. In majority of exams, it will say, provide steps on how to execute the problem, right? You get a partial credit for the right answer, but at least you get some partial credit if you get the answer wrong, but at least you went through the steps similar. So again, AI system thinks really similar to the human. So if you ask to provide the steps, you most likely get the better result out of the system than if you just solve the problem. And the last thing is more sophisticated. We're now talking about thought of reasoning, chain of thoughts of reasoning. So now what we're asking is actually the system two-way prompting, which is first prompt, you ask system to reason instructions. So you ask them to tell you how they're solving the problem. But then if you want to have the answer correct, you can ask for answer instructions. So this type of approaches and techniques make the system much more useful, much more accurate when you're actually looking for accuracy. But I want to just repeat one thing. The generative systems are not built for accuracy. You can train them to be more accurate. You can train them to become more sophisticated, but the reasoning is in name. It's generative. So it generates the information, it generates data. And in majority of today's system, we try to create these boxes or create using other techniques that are more specialized to augment the system to ensure that interaction is constrained to specific topic or specific conversation. And we force system to, for example, give the answer like, I don't know, if the information is not available, and ask them not to infer information if you're not available. So, okay, so the last topic that I probably want to talk about before we look at the AI education is as we're talking about all this information, create a mistrust in the system. And this is really important. And I think the developing of the system or adoption of the system will be hinged on how trustful these technologies are and how transparent this technology and how accountable this technology is. So that required a work across technology company, education systems, government, and business to understand how to support this technology so they can not deliver the harm. So, for example, Microsoft works very actively with the governments around the world to develop the policy and governances that is provide policy regulation to control or understand how the system develop, where the data is coming from, how the system make decisions. And the reason why it's important because the companies, and this is my firm belief, like Microsoft should not be the policing agents. We're not the one who tells everybody how they should do this and what it should be done. As a society, we need to make decisions around how we control the system, what's our approach to that, and what's our principle around that. So Microsoft, for example, look at this, again, responsible AI, you might heard a lot around that, is a very big field of development right now where Microsoft is investing a lot of money around that to ensure that we are focusing really on understanding what we believe important, and we make it very transferable, how corporate standards apply this so we're accountable for what we're doing today, and how the implementation and oversight work for this to comply with standards and principles. So let's just talk about some important things that I feel like will happen in the next few years that will definitely help where AI can be used in a positive way, and how we think about this, where we can help, right? So one of the things that it's going to be a huge benefit is ability to access and include more people in education and allow them to feel more included. I think, Stefan, when we talked about yesterday, I share my experiences. I came in the United States in 2000. I thought my English was good, but I went through the Santa Monica College, my first experience back to United States schooling system. I have really strong background in math and physics, and I always loved this field. But when I went to Santa Monica College, I failed on my first exam that the teacher gave us. I still remember this in linear algebra. And she told us that if you fail this exam, you probably should drop the class and you're not going to be able to finish it because you just don't have basic understanding. My problem was not mathematics. After I spent some time opening the dictionary and understanding the words that was on that exam, I was really upset and disappointed because a lot of this concept I knew very well, but the nuance of the language, the scientific language, was a problem for me at that time. I have to spend a lot of time while going through the class to ensure that I actually spend a lot of time translating, learning. I felt disabled in a lot of cases because when the teacher will put some problems, I knew how to solve that. I understand that, but I did not have language capability to explain that. And instead, I was sitting in the room quietly because I just felt, I was afraid that if I speak in the wrong language, I use the wrong terminology. And that's example, a lot of people have similar disability, other disability, that preventing them to participate and educational communities really in a full speed. And so today, as you can see probably on the slides, today we have the technology that allows, for example, to translate what I'm saying. It's pretty accurate, given my accent and given my some mistakes that I make. But it's provide the ability for a lot of people today to access to information through speech recognition, text to speech, speech to text, translation, to be able to be better participate and get better advantage from educational system. I think related to this personalized learning, I think sometimes we're forgetting that a lot of people come from different backgrounds. In this particular case, in my case, scientific language was a problem. And so today I was able to translate a lot of information that I have from academia language to information that I can discuss with the kids. A few times I actually, I was speaking in my son's school about what the AI is, and you can imagine I cannot talk about the statistical models and so forth. So I asked the Copilot to rewrite some of my PowerPoint presentation in a format that fifth grader can understand. You should see the example of that. That was fascinating because it's not just rewrote all my statements in a format that 5-year-old, 12-year-old can understand, but it also added much more interesting pictures for fifth graders to understand the topics that we're talking, make them excited. And as I said, behind the project is that we've done together to start to do art, tell their stories through the art and through the magic of the art. I think teacher-student interaction is another interesting thing. I think we talk about a lot, I hear a lot about concern about cheating and how the cheating will affect the system. But I also have to think about that in the majority of the schools, the ratio between student and teachers is still too high. And the teachers continue to focus on the middle ground. And we have a lot of kids that may be on the bottom, on the top, that might not get as much interaction or challenges or opportunities, because it's just not fair to the teachers to be able to respond to everybody at work. So AI actually can be a great tutor. A lot of times we've seen right now a system that has been developed that allowed the system to assess the level of the student and help them to start to grow and build the confidence and ability to interact. We also see interesting projections around, for example, one of the teachers that I work with, in her creative writing, the AI is used in a very positive way, where where students ask to write their stories, and then they use AI to rewrite in different styles, different era, and then they discuss how the styles are different, why it's different. So it's fascinating to see how engaged the students are, because again, reflecting on my own background, I'm a horrible writer. I mean, I'm a mathematician. I cannot write for the sake of me. But I think I have a lot of thoughts that I would like to share. So today, the capability of Copilot to help me to articulate better certain ideas, articulate ideas in a more impactful way, become a voice, an amplifier that I needed. And I saw the same thing in that particular students' room, where students were so excited to talk about the work, and they were so excited to talk about what their ideas was around the stories and how the story was created, and then how the AI helped them to rethink the story in a more creative way. Another thing that we see a lot of opportunities is the curriculum enrichment. So we start to see a lot of, when we talk about multi-agents, creating multimedia simulation games, virtual reality, incorporating this in a learning context that allowed people to have a much more interesting experiences in a way that they already experienced the world. So again, one of the examples of that, and unfortunately today I don't have the presentation ready for that, but this is one of the companies that I work with called TouchCast. And today, this particular company was able to create on the fly a virtual presentation of of the work, and I worked with them where they literally took all my presentation, my posting, my publishing, and create entire conference based on that, right? With the speakers, with the people. So you can create your own avatars, you can create your own people, you can create your images, put these images. And what's fascinating about this, it's probably take 10 minutes to do that. It's also the system where you can interact with that system. You can ask the system around the questions that for this topic, and it's restricted to that topic. So while the person is presenting, virtual person presenting, and the virtual person will respond to the question that from audience. So today it's me, but next time we don't know. Maybe it's going to be somebody, my avatar, that will be presenting the information. And another important thing from administrative perspective, we see actually a lot of capabilities that will allow you to create much better and more sophisticated support for the students. Provide them information in real time, creating the solution that actually help you to do better financial management, create a system that's more responsive to the students. And it's funny because as a student right now, myself, back to this, being a student, sometimes I wish the system was a little bit more smarter and more intelligent. So after this keynote presentation, I'm actually talking to Chicago booth on a very similar topic about how we can make it a little bit better. So as a student, I actually have better understandings around the system that I access. I have more understanding how I can find information better, or how I can intelligently interact with the system to ensure that we actually, I took full advantage of my education capabilities here. So I think one thing that I want to left, I know that we're kind of running out of time, and I want to make sure that we have some time for question left. But the Microsoft believes strongly that we need to invest in educators and we need to invest in our students to make sure that the future looks bright for all of us. So I left this here, and I will share this the presentation with you later. But we have a lot of extensive learning available today, both for students and for educators on AI space. You can access to this. This is free for you. There is additional information that we can create the courses with you. We can help with some of the solutions. So I highly encourage you to look at that and understand how potentially it can use in your systems. The Educator Center focusing from K to our schools, middle school, high schools, to the high level education. So I highly encourage you to check this out and see if this is something that you can use for your education, and enjoy using our tool. So thank you very much. So I guess I will take a few questions. I don't know how much time I have, but let me know if we have time for questions.
We still have 20 minutes left of the session. If anybody has any questions, I have a microphone and I can come to you.
Hi, Irina. Thank you so much for your time today. Truly, truly fascinating and vaguely terrifying stuff. What's being done, and what can we do to prevent bad actors from using artificial intelligence for nefarious deeds? I mean, obviously, we can see so much good coming out of it, but the flip side of that is so much bad can potentially come out of it. What is being done to combat bad actors using AI in a negative way?
Oh man, it's a whole topic. We can spend probably 2 to 3 days on that just to give you some ideas. But this is just to be very clear, this is on top of the mind for every company that right now developing AI, and every government, I think, in the world. So I can share a few things that we see happening that I think moving our world in a positive way. So if you're not familiar, EU just create a AI act that actually is, this is one of the first regulation. I think the news that we have is the EU usually move faster than United States, and we usually use there as an example of where potentially governance can go. So they first were creating GDPR, who's not familiar, it's a data compliance around the data. EU Act is the first attempt to start to understand how we can qualify the data and how we can start to qualify AI, and how we can start to think about what it will take to build the system, what's the risk of the system, and how we're going to mitigate these risks, right? So this is really, it's a good actors, I will say, that maybe make bad choices. So the attempt is right now to give people framework, organization framework, to start to think about where they lie and what's the accountability, responsibility lies to ensure that the system do not do harm. Microsoft invest billions and billions of dollars in our security centers. Our Microsoft Security Centers was on the front when Russia attacked Ukraine, and we define a lot of solution to defend Ukraine from the cyber attacks that Russia launched on them. And Microsoft continued to invest in understanding and managing. Today we have a huge AI cybercrime units that are focusing primarily to understand how the bad actors can use, how this is going to use, and what it's going to use. So, not become political, but we're coming to the election, the misinformation going to fly to left and right, and AI will be in the center of these conversations. And it will be, as you said, it's a little bit terrifying to see what's going to happen, but it's also important that there is a lot of companies, the research right now around that, to understand how to prevent that, how to deal with that, and how to start to put law and policies around that to protect the society from that. So, as I said, the field is still very young. So I think we're going to see a few events that will be that will cause us to rethink and make decisions faster. But I think this is going to be a combination of a lot of research that's coming out, technology and business working together, and governments working together to define what it is. I think the only thing that I will say, we don't have an option to say it's not going to happen. AI is out. It's not something that you can put back. Right. So if we start to put restrictive laws or anything that said you're prohibited to use X, Y, and Z, or prohibited to do that, it's not going to go away. It's going to go and it's going to work. So our best option in this case to learn, to observe, to respond, and continue to build more sophisticated response system to that. So I know it's not maybe the most pink or, but this is the pragmatic response to that type of question. So hopefully it's not, I know it's not what's comforting, that's the answer, but I hope it's kind of give you an idea that there is a hope.
Big room, give me just a second.
Hello, and thank you for your talk. I'm going to flip the conversation for a minute. In that I'm an educator, avid user of AI. I have college-age daughters who think that AI is going to be the demise of all critical thinking and knowledge in the world. And I want to ask you for a minute to put on your student hat, and I'm also making an assumption, which you can feel free to correct, that you do use AI when you're doing your student work. So how do you identify this is a proper use for AI as a student, and this is not how I should be using AI as a student, so that it's not the demise of all knowledge and critical thinking?
Yeah, as you saw in our presentation, I believe critical thinking is essential for our students to be able to find the jobs in the next 20 years. I think critical thinking and emotional skills, emotional intelligence will be the most important thing. So yes, it's very interesting because I think there is a tons of, and we have this conversation with my professors and the administrative college. What does it mean? I think the question, cheating is very interesting word use. And the question is, what's the intent and what's the purpose of using an AI? And so, again, my experience right now is different. I coming back to college not because I want to get A and Bs. I don't really care about the grades at this point, right? As you can imagine, it doesn't affect my career that much. But I really care about the knowledge, and I care about interaction, and I care about what's going to be left in my head. So when I, as a student, look at where I see the most useful, I find I adapt it to my learning style. So, for example, as you can imagine, an MBA and having a full-time job, I have to look. There's a lot of reading that I have to do, and my style of work is, as we talk with Stefan, is I read a lot of executive summaries. This is my job right now, right? To make a decision really fast based on the information that is provided. So, as a student, I usually take a case study and really try to understand the summarization of that first, right? To understand what this article is talking about. And this is some of the, things that I potentially can use Copilot for. But then really, as I talk about the biases, really question sometimes what it's wrote, right? And then start to look at the information. And in some cases, when I feel I disagree or I do not necessarily agree with the point that articles make, I will probably go and ask, find me more information about this type of data. Because again, my interest right now in my program today is get a well-rounded information, understanding of what this particular topic is about, how we think about it. So I am curious about different opinions, and if it's either confirming my opinions or opposite of my opinions, I want to seek opinions of different perspectives to understand that. And this is where I think my maybe more scientific background coming out, because when I was asked to write my scientific papers in Johns Hopkins, they will ask, citations, 10, 15 citation for confirming this, 10 citation for that. So now today, when I'm researching this thing, I really start to question pretty much every point and try to understand that. So I think this is where AI comes really good in research side of this business, where I can come and ask to do the research on a topic. And this is where the asking question correctly makes sense, because I'm not asking to confirm or deny certain topics. I'm looking for different opinions. And I will ask question about, go and rate each opinions, rate all the articles that you find. So it's helped me to dissect an amount of information that is out there in something that I can digest in a real specific time. So I think this is really important. The second part, what I say is, and yesterday we have this Stefan conversation too, I almost got F on my first paper in Johns Hopkins. And the teacher returned to me paper and said, you have 1 hour to rewrite this, because everything that you make sense, everything is correct. We just, this is a scientific paper. It's not a memo, right? And this is what I do. For 16 years, I work in an industry where majority of my writing is around, what we discuss, main topics, discussion, what the action item is taking, how we approach, what's the timeline, and so forth. So this is my preferred way of communication today, right? So bullet points is how I communicate. This is not how you write scientific papers. So I said, okay, well, at that time we didn't have Copilot, but I have to rewrite. I spent probably an hour rewriting that paper in format that he asked, and I have to look at the scientific papers and kind of figure out how to translate what I wrote in more like storytelling language. Today, I can do it within 5 minutes, right? Today, I can take my thoughts, my thinking, my style of communication, and rewrite in any style of communication that's applicable in that particular environment. I think, I don't know, this is where, like, I talk to some professors, they say, well, but that's what some of the things you need to learn. I will say no, because when I work and when my team work, and if they tell me that they spent 30 or 1 hour to rewriting what they wrote, I will say, why? This is not what we paid for. It's not what we do. And effective communication is important, but spending an hour to rewriting something is not part of my job. It's not what I paid for. This is not how I measure. So I think this is where sometimes you need to think about what academia asking versus when you go to the work environments, which is not an academia, it's a very different requirement. So that's my reflection right now as a student, as a working person. This is how I look at this. So I hope it's helped. I think it was a stream of thoughts rather than a chain of thoughts right now. But this is my reflection right now as I'm going through the college. And again, I think it's very different when you're a 20-year-old going through the college versus, well, and I'm not going to say how old I am, but much 20 years later, right? It's a little bit different reason why I'm in college today. So I think this is where we need to understand that how we encourage people, how we inspire them to do what they do, and leveraging their strengths, teaching them their capability, inspire them rather than limiting them, right? Just because maybe I'm not as gifted in writing than I'm in talking, right? So that's my perspective. I hope it helps, but it's my personal perspective on the question that you ask.
Hi, Irina. A related question. You mentioned having a fifth grader, and so this might offer some insights as well. What surprised you about the way your fifth grader has used these tools and his friends as well? And then what maybe has surprised you about the way you've reacted to things you've learned about the way he and his friends are maybe using these tools in perhaps unexpected ways?
Oh my God, this is the best lab that you can have, the fifth graders, right? Because you have to realize, and I think most of us, we still remember time before the mobile phones, right? So when I show this slide and I'm like, man, I'm old. I remember time before the mobile phone. I remember time before the internet. I remember time before the Facebook, which probably was the best time. So when I see our son, you realize that they grow up, 5-year-old, at least they already grew up with Alexa in the house, right? In some cases we become dumber because I'm not actually quite honestly know where my switches for some of the lights are, because majority of the time we say, kitchen is down, light up, and he knows all these commands and he coming and turning the lights. I think if Alexa go down, I don't think we physically will be able to figure out where the lights are in our house, right? So this is the environment that they already grew up. They're growing up with digital introduction them. So there is a few positive things that I think so fascinating to see how it's creating such a fascinating creative environment. So I give you an example. When I showed my picture behind that, one of the things that in the summer we've done, my son love reading, which I'm so happy. He loves reading. But we said, listen, you like reading, so let's just create something. Let's just think about the game. You can create a game, and you can create a game that allowed you to think about how they interact and everything else. Because again, game developing is very fascinating, but it can be very daunting to create. And the game developing, surprisingly, is very interesting because it's allowed you to think about story, because each game should have a story. There has some story. There has to be characters. There is somehow the characters interact. They have to learn different skill set and how you combine it, because you cannot make one character more stronger than another. So he created a group of friends, which is, again, talking about leadership, right? And they sit down and they start to use Midjourney, which is a free tool that you can use for the art creation. There is another called Leonardo and ChatGPT, and they start to create the world. And they decided the world will contains of kittens because they love cats. And I'll probably share the cats. They create fascinating cats, I have to say. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, I stole one of this cat as part of my articles that I publish every week around AI. That cat, Ninja Cat, was created by my son. I pay him $10 for that, just to be very clear. So he's already making money on his AI. capabilities, but they start to think about, it was fascinating to see transformation for the first cat that created, that just create a cute cat. And he started to learn how to say what he actually wants to do and how this cat look like. One interesting effect that we saw that with him, at some point he was super sad, and I was trying to figure out what's going on. And he becoming teenager at some point, so there is kind of parents no longer invited in conversation. So I asked him to reflect on what's happening and design a cat that maybe reflect how he thinks about that. I will tell you this was very therapeutic for both of us, because he was able to describe the feeling and describing emotions and create the cat and environment around that cat. And we just talk about what does it mean, why the cat is sad, and like how we can, and then we ask to create the prompts that ask the cat to, what will make cat happy, right? And so he started to think about the words that will describe happiness and how it will make him happy. And so it was very therapeutic, but in the end, we actually created a story about the cat that was super sad and become happy again. It was almost an animated movie now. And they continue with the friends to create that. What's interesting about that whole collaboration between them is you're learning that, some people are very good storytellers and they can create a story. Some of them is much more gifted in creating images. But working together, they actually were able to create an entire world with cats, with different capabilities, with different superpowers. But then they realized, we don't want the cats fight against the cats. So who do we need to bring? Dogs. So now the whole dogs come out, right? So in the end, we were using the rubber blocks to actually generate these images, create 3D images and everything else. So this is a very complicated game development environment that I remember in the college was one of the most toughest subject I ever took in the classes. And this is, now teaching this to 12-year-old in a format that we didn't talk about any theory about storytelling, about game developing around the character development and so forth, and then 3D creation of these images and everything else. And we have a full-blown game. So I think that's when they grow up, I believe we're going to look like dinosaurs. Well, at least I'm going to look like a dinosaur, because I remember theory and I remember how hard it is. And they will say it's a piece of cake, right? So I think this is a positive thing. On another thing, on the darker side, which we really need to think about when it's come to the kids, we as humans turn to personalize AI. One of the big caution I say, do not give the AI a personality as it's actually one of the biggest mistakes when we talk about Alexa. If I right now ask you, when I talk to my husband, he will say something like, she said something. And I'm like, she's who? Alexa. So suddenly this is a female. So you humanizing the AI. And that can create a problem, especially for the teenagers and developing personalities, because it's much easier to create connection with AI. The AI today is 100% better than the humans in recognizing the emotions. They will never going to be angry with you. They're never going to create a conflict with you. So we want that feelingness of closeness, right? We want somebody who always understands us, who always on our side, who always there. And that connection can be very damaging, because the kids in school specifically need to learn how to deal. The way we learn today, how we know the person is mad at us, because we saw somebody mad at us. We saw it so many times that now when you see somebody, you kind of can see, you don't know how, but you know that the person is mad, right? These skills are required us to be in human environments, interact with the humans, build these capabilities, ability to build the response, correctly responding to these capabilities and so forth. We can see a lot of loneliness coming out of that, because it's hard when, especially you're a teenager, to build a relationship. Conflicts start to happen, and it's easier to go in the AI world where everybody loves you, understands you, cuddles you, and responds you in a way that makes you feel better, right? So one of the talks that at some point we talk with the medical community around is the, digital autism, where we as a humans stop being able to understand another human's emotions. And that's, I think, one of the things where we very strict. I will say this personally in my house, how much time my son spends with the technology, how much time we do this, and how much he interaction with the human. So I think this is, positive side, fantastic, great. The second part, we still need to interact with the humans to make sure that we stay human. So that's my response to that. So hopefully it's helped.
We have time for one last question, if anybody has one. I see you. I'm coming.
You betcha. So I'm from Minnesota, and I'm not one of the cheeseheads. And I would like to bring up the point that I just said that as a colloquialism and possibly creating a safety issue of getting to my car. And I'm concerned as a public speaking instructor and a person who teaches communication about how we're homogenizing our voice and how students at times are second guessing their voice. And I love the stories that you've shared. I heard you talk about our Wisconsin roads here, and I had that problem yesterday. And you talked about yourself even saying that you couldn't write for your life, and you're an amazing public speaker. And I think our students at times are giving up their voice, even with Grammarly, not even just going into ChatGPT or other tools. And they're seeing, oh, this is better. And I've seen this with a couple of my students who are English learners, have maybe 3-4 rich languages, and are giving up their voice in many ways that concern me. So I'm just curious, as educators, what might you suggest to us as designers? What might we do to help students retain their sense of self? And then secondly, how are we helping educators to do this? Because as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking like, wow, I have to have I have to change how I'm teaching public speaking so that they can do virtual conferences like you had mentioned with this company. And I think that there's going to be a lot of creativity, but some of us are getting older and we can't keep up, don't you know?
So I have the same conversation with myself when I decide to go to Chicago booth, and I'm like, I'm too old to become a student. My gosh, I have a great career. Why do I do this? Why I'm doing to myself not to sleeping to 2 a.m. in the morning learning again, right? So we never old to learn, I will say that. But second part, I think communication is the most fascinating part of this. I thank you so much for saying that I'm a great public speaker. And probably to become a good public speaker, you really need to speak, right? I think if I look at my first presentation when I've done, they probably were not that smooth. I probably not necessarily knew the stories. And I think this is where the question, I remember my first teacher on the communication and public speaking, and I still remember her, and she was fantastic. I think she built a lot of confidence in me to reflect on my style without being judgmental, or kind of provide the feedback. Because again, a lot of people, we have to understand that the majority of the people are not comfortable with public speaking, including me, by the way. But you learn and you get excited about the topics that you talk. And so I think when it's come to AI, has to be a balance, because it can be used as a crunch, as I agree with you, because even with the image creation, I think it's, and I love art. And I see that if you just start to put the words in a ChatGPT, it will create something that sometimes feels not yours. So as Stefan talked about it's learning iterative processes, expressing yourself, ability to give people ability to express the way they want it, how you feel this talking, whether it's sophisticated enough, it's not sophisticated enough, if it's scientific enough, 5-year great conversation. Just ability for people to express and passion about the topics that they love to talk, and then convert that maybe in the first draft with the AI in something that maybe is more structural, and have the conversation about what the structure means. I think, the best thing that I remember today about the communication that I took classes around is we spoke about the structure. We talk about how we convince people, how there is a different techniques, how you talk about this, how you lecture, how you engage. And it was super fascinating because this is AI will not provide it. But with these techniques, when I'm today looking at output of AI, I can reflect and say, is it reflecting to audience that I'm going to talk to? Is it's relevant to audience that I'm going to talk to? Is the tone that I choose is correct tone for this audience versus another audience? So, as we talk about this, I talk with the academia, sometimes I talk with the business, sometimes I talk with technologists, sometimes I talk to the fifth graders, right? And in a lot of cases, I actually introduce the same information. So you learn these different techniques during the communication classes that important. And I think practicing, for public speaking, you have to practice. And in some cases, have this conversation about, well, what type of techniques do you apply? What's your audience? What kind of, tools that you use to be more effective? All that today is super important for me, right, as a speaker, and reflecting that part. So I think that conversation, this is where it's come critical thinking. This is where ability to, I will be honest, like first, I remember a conversation with her, she said, first of all, forgive yourself, right? Majority of the mistake that you make when you speak, it's bad. Nobody even heard that. So don't worry about this. And reflect what's positive about how you feel about this afterwards, how you feel about this. So she make it so personal for me, and she make it so exciting for me that I'm forever grateful to her for that. But I think this is kind of my feedback on this, because helping people to tweak and learn and then apply the techniques to be more effective speaker, I think it's going to be positive. Overuse is going to be important to detect. Overuse and relying on AI too much is actually really important to understand. And so that's where you almost like with the drug, you need to understand where it's beneficial and where you become an addict, right? And kind of manage that behavior correctly. So that's my response and my reflection on that.
Irina, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Please join me in thanking Irina for talking with us this morning. You're very much appreciated. Now we have no more fears.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for inviting to me, and I'm looking forward. Please reach out to me. Organizers have my emails if you guys interested in anything, and I will send them my slides so you guys have it. And please check our Students Hub and UW-Stout. I think you'll find a lot of information fascinating that make your life more interesting. Not interesting, sorry about that word. You see, public speaking, more fun, as I said. So have fun with that. I think it's going to be exciting next few years.
Thank you
Thank
much.
you.